Hi, guys. Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Veil, a podcast on psychic protection, spiritual hygiene, and navigating the ebbs and flows of the healing journey as you learn to master both your sovereign and shadow selves. My name is Lauren on Earth, your host, and today's topic is the underworld. And we've talked in previous episodes about the negative soul groups that live and exist in the fourth to sixth dimension. I'll get into how they're connected in a little bit, but I just thought it would be a good idea to talk about the below world and what I believe is going on there. I've spent a lot of time in the underworld, both in my own personal journey of learning what I know now to apply to clients, but I also spend many hours of the day in client session where I'm having more experiences in the underworld, not just my own, but seeing how others have navigated this space, where they've gotten stuck or separated throughout their journey. And yeah, putting all of that together, I've learned a lot. I have a lot to say. And this is really just going to be an introduction into what I believe is going on in the underworld, why and how I feel it manifested, maybe some of my own personal experiences. And of course, we will continue to build on this in episodes to come. So I've talked a lot in past episodes on unity versus separation consciousness and how when we are in higher dimensions, there is little separation from God's source. Whereas the lower down the ladder we travel, there is more separation from God's source. Both are necessary experiences for the soul to have to evolve. We experience what it's like to be one with all. And we also want to experience what it's like to have individuality and our own sense of self, where, of course, for most of us, we are still connected to God, but we're also an individual and experiencing ourselves in a unique way. And I can't remember the stories I've told at this point. I don't think I've shared it on the podcast, but in ayahuasca back in 2021, one of the messages that came through, and I was having a conversation with God, which has happened a few times since where I'm there and I'm present. And I remember this was one of the first where I really felt that I was right in front, immersed in this energy. And God said, the game of life is that all possibilities exist. So anything that you can think or create is possible. And that is the fun of life and the beauty of life, which means regardless of whether it's a positive or negative intent or interaction, all possibilities exist. So, I've shared in previous episodes that I believe the separation from God was created when consciousness decided to separate and almost like turn away from God and from themselves. And over time it manifested into what we see here with the darker forces and the underworld. And yes, the Milky Way is a dualistic galaxy, very much so. And there are definitely other galaxies and other universes that are also experiencing duality. So this is nothing new to us. But we're going to talk about the underworld here in this galaxy and specifically on Earth today, because that's what I know, because that's, where I am and where all of you are. So yes, there are underworlds in other places, in other star systems in this galaxy as well. and of course other galaxies. But yeah, the Milky Way, it's a place of duality. We're here to explore and experience duality. And that is why the whole love and light, not look at the shadows, is very harmful to everyone, not just the individual choosing that, because they're here to experience this part of themselves, this shadow self that that's a big part of why they came here. So they're out of alignment when they're only choosing to see one. So the underworld is a place of separation consciousness, and it generally is a lower frequency. Again, there's no good or bad attached to a higher or lower frequency. It just is. It's just fact. The underworld, there's more separation from God. The frequency is generally lower, whereas in the above worlds, the frequency is generally higher, and there is less separation consciousness, which means more of a connection to God. And because of that, the reality manifests in the way that it's being reflected through the sound and frequency, and it just is. And we attach positive and negative to it because we also need to make sense of it, and this is the way that our brains are helping us to understand this energy. So heaven and hell, what creates heaven and hell? Like, yeah, they are places, but really it's the sound and frequency that creates the reality that invokes a certain state of consciousness. And if you've ever been to a festival where you were at one set that was beautiful and happy and everyone was dancing and in a state of joy because of the music, and then you walk over to another set where you're immediately immersed in an entirely different world because the music is different, the frequency is different, the vibe is different. And that's just the example coming to me of the difference in how sound and frequency can really create this world that you're stepping into. So if you've kind of experienced something like that, maybe you know what I mean. I'm sure there are other examples, but I've been in the underworld for a while. But in that same ayahuasca retreat that I just spoke on back in 2021 is when I really experienced a version of a hell realm for the first time, where I was immersed in it. Because there's a difference with me astral traveling and me experiencing this in a way where I'm more protected, I'm still in my body. But when you're on the medicine, you're brought to these places and you're really experiencing it fully. And there's a difference there. So my first time ever experiencing something like that, where maybe I've told this before, but I found myself in this realm, and it took me a minute to even gain consciousness, where everything was stuck together and the colors were really dull, but they were all like morphing together. Consciousness was stuck and stagnant. Nothing was moving. Clocks were melting. No one was able to communicate. And I felt other soul fragments that were down there, but we weren't able to communicate with each other because the energy was so stuck that the sound frequencies or the telepathic frequencies weren't able to reach anyone. And it wasn't this dark and scary and, evil place that I went to. But when I came out of it, I was like, that is a version of what, we mean by hell, because the sound, the frequency, the lack of life force energy created this reality where there wasn't abundance and expansion. And that is just what I believe the difference to be with heaven and hell. And our own energy is a match to either or. And I'm sure, just like myself, maybe you guys have experienced, hell on earth and heaven on earth. And that is really also the beauty of earth, where both exist and we're here to experience both. because we're learning a lot about ourselves in the process. So the underworld is a vast space. There's a lot going on down there with many subrealms and worlds, and not all of them are evil. There are different varying degrees to these worlds that are down there. And I'm going to continue to share some experiences that I've had so you can kind of get an idea for the makeup of this place. And obviously, you know, there's so much that I still haven't explored myself. So just a couple examples, but I just wanted to share too that the inner earth is not the same as the underworld, but some realms of inner earth can be considered the underworld. And I've also seen some elemental underworld realms where the beings look like these distorted pixies, fairies, earthy type beings, but it's an underworld version of the elemental realm. And speaking of the Fae, there are many portals to the underworld on Earth. One of them being the Tor in Glastonbury, which actually connects the above world to the middle world, which is where we live, where the Fae live, to the underworld. And the difference between that portal to the underworld and others that I've seen and come across is that this portal is managed and protected by beings of light and with integrity and pure intention, because we still have to remain and have a connection to the underworld. The intention isn't to close all of the underworld portals and completely separate from that part of the earth that is very much just as important as the middle and the above worlds. But these other portals that are all over the globe are overseen by dark beings, and they are opened by dark beings who have a different intention. There are a lot of dark portals in Sedona, in the Middle East. They're here in Tulum, Antarctica, and even Mount Shasta, where I learned back in 2021 when I was there that there are people, cults that go to these powerful sites to harvest energy and open up these portals. And we actually drove through one of them on the way up the mountain, and this octopus thing attached to one of the women in the car. Interestingly, now enough, she turned out to not be working with the light. But yeah, it was still a lesson for me to see, oh, this happens. And if you do cross a portal, it is likely that something could attach to you. So I spent time, and I already was spending time understanding how to identify these in the forest and also in cities and on people, so I can learn how to protect myself and be just aware of my surroundings. So in the underworld, there is generally less light, which means there's also more darkness and more suppression. And again, darkness does not equal bad, but because everything is more hidden, it is easier to manipulate consciousness. It's easier to hide. And so it's the intention that changes things. It's what happens as a result of being separated from God. And even in darkness, if you have pure intention where you're still able to stay connected to your heart and operate from a place of service to all, then you're having a very different experience in the darkness. But a lot of souls get lost and they experience the darker side of the darkness. And that is kind of where evil starts to, you start to, experience that. Because to me, my definition of evil is anything that is anyone or anything that is manipulating energy to be of service to that person rather than in service to all, or in service to the person whose energy they're manipulating. And so there are beings and souls down there with this intention. And that's what makes parts of the underworld not a safe space to be. But again, there are souls doing the same thing here on earth and in broad daylight. So, yeah, I also believe that the underworld also exists here on earth. The third dimension, there is where we're starting to see, okay, the lower realms are meeting the higher realms. And same with the fourth dimension. It's kind of this middle ground where there's kind of this equal balance of light and dark. So the difference between dark and evil, again, the souls that live in this realm have strayed far from God. They've strayed from their hearts, from their truth. They have disconnected, not entirely, but enough to create immense change in their being, their mind, their perception, belief, thought. And I found that one thing that the souls of the underworld all have in common is self-hatred. And I believe that is because they have disconnected from their true self, which is God, because we all come from the same source, which is God. So when you turn your back on that, you're not yourself, and you begin to develop these feelings that become many different forms of self-hatred. And it's not only the souls that live in the underworld, but humans, because there are humans on earth that have come from the underworld and they are now experiencing this light and God frequencies in this way for the first time. Whereas there are also a lot of souls that have come from higher dimensions that have really only been experiencing God. And now they're here experiencing the underworld, and it's not easy. And then you connect with souls that have only really experienced separation, at least for a very long time. And we kind of have this mix. And that's why sometimes I think we connect with and meet these people where we just can't understand how they can do these things and behave in this way. And they're here on earth to learn a new way. And that's why we have to have compassion for them and continue to set the example on what is possible when we let go of all of the beliefs and thoughts and the accumulation of energy from being in these spaces where there was separation. So humans also have aspects of consciousness that live in the underworld. Most of us are here to retrieve these aspects of consciousness. So for even some of us that come from other places, from other star systems where there is a stronger connection to God, we still have attachments to the underworld, and we're here to understand that and work through that because most of us have been on Earth for a while, or other star systems like Orion, where there has been darkness, trauma, and I'll kind of get into this a little bit later, but where because of these experiences, we have descended into the underworld. And now in this lifetime, it is time for us to go back and understand that and retrieve those soul aspects. So you have souls from the underworld that are here in human form. And you have souls that are here from higher dimensions that have been working through understanding separation consciousness and light versus dark and are meant to experience the underworld. And what I'm kind of saying, going back to, this self-hatred piece, just what I've noticed with all of the beings that I've come across is that one thing that they have in common is a lack of self-love and a deep, deep insecurity. So for many of us, yes, we have soul aspects down there. We agreed to this to understand what separation consciousness feels like, who we become when placed in that environment, to learn, to grow, to evolve. Because of the veil, we get stuck or lost or trapped down there by entities that reign the underworld that are very skilled in manipulation and deceit. And I say this all the time in session, but our third dimensional selves, our earth self, is a higher self, a higher aspect of consciousness to these parts of us in the underworld that need our help and are trying to communicate with us. And they are really begging, I don't want to use the word begging, but for us to listen, to help them. And that's why sometimes we feel low or depressed, or we have these emotions that we're not sure where they're coming from, can't make sense of them. We're feeling this version of us in the underworld calling out for help. But what do we do most of the time? Because we don't know how to decipher and determine. We haven't been taught that. We suppress it, we ignore it, and it just becomes even more separate because we don't know. So again, this was the message for me, but maybe it applies to you. For my soul evolution, I had to go to the bottom, to the complete opposite end of God. So here is the highest point of God, and I had to experience the complete opposite of that, the lowest point. It was a soul initiation. I mean, it still is. I'm not complete. It has taken me millions of years so far. And I'm at this turning point right now where I have completed the soul retrieval in the underworld and I'm on the up. And this is my 555th lifetime on earth as a human. And that number I got a while ago, but it all kind of hit me recently where with what happened over 8/8 and all of the attacks, where I realized the significance of that number, how it was always planned, 555 being the point of change. So I've had lifetimes on Earth, yes, 555, lifetimes on other star systems, both to prepare and to gain the necessary skills to do this, because it's not I guess you can look at it as this linear descent in a way, but it wasn't linear in terms of the lifetimes that I've had. So I've had lifetimes on other star systems where I've had to study and learn the necessary skills to be able to identify and transmute these really sticky, stuck energies to get myself out of this place. And then I would experience, let's say, for example, a lifetime on Orion, where then I was put in that environment to put my skills into use. And all of my lifetimes on Earth, there has been an element of darkness. They've been pretty brutal, I'm not going to lie. Most of the lifetimes, the 555 lifetimes, have involved suffering because I've been connected to this cult that for all this time. So they've had a hand in everything that I've done, but I've also had a hand in everything that they've done, and that was the whole point, and why I had to play this long game with them to eventually, one, be able to expose it, and then also to get myself out of it and help millions of other people get out of it as well. So I'm here on earth now to retrieve these soul aspects in lower dimensions, because we can't evolve if we're leaving parts of ourselves behind. And this is a big thing that I see for a lot of people, why they feel blocked or being unable to move forward, to call in their manifestations, because they're not looking at the shadow. And there's an aspect of their consciousness that they cannot leave behind. So it's a form of protection. If you are trying to, let's just use the word, ascend upward and evolve upward, and there are literal soul fragments in the shadow that are hidden in lower dimensions, you can't keep going until you've made sure that all of you is coming with you, right? So until you're able to identify that and bring, you don't want to leave a part of yourself behind, you know? So your team, your guides, your higher self, everyone is trying to protect you in a way. It's like, this can't happen until we complete this. So it kind of goes back to what I shared in the last podcast of not being able to hear your guides or hear a message because you're being asked to change perspective and look at something differently. I feel stuck. Why? Critical think, look at things from all angles, work through the negative ego, the suppression, whatever it is that will ultimately come up once you create the space for it. And, a lot of times people are like, well, how do I find that? And it's really just a matter of letting go of all and this is not so easy, I understand that, but the thoughts and especially the ego is a huge thing that keeps us stuck in these paradigms where we're unable to hear the message and to see what we need to do because of the ego. And everyone needs to go on their own journey to, go through the ego death and work with the ego to support what's going on with the whole. And it is very much possible. And yeah, I with the ego, what I feel, and I think I've shared this before, is that there have been these constructs that I call the negative ego, this form of manipulation that keeps the ego in this state of me, me, me. And I believe that the reptilians are very much behind this. So, yeah, I see a lot of healers, a lot of spiritual people also very much stuck in ego. It's a big part of why I left the LA spiritual community. I see it here in Tulum. I mean, it's everywhere. And for me, I just feel that, yeah, everyone has to kind of go on their own journey with that, so they can ultimately let go and surrender and create space for the message of what they need to do without getting defensive or, that story of something's wrong with me or, nothing's wrong with me. So anyway, another thing I realized, and again, I was already unconsciously very much living in the underworld my whole life, only to become consciously aware of it in 2018. So from 2018 to 2021, I was learning about entities and all of these things that were affecting my mental health, my physical health, my emotional health, everything. And I didn't put together that I had entity attachments that were causing all of these issues. I didn't know any better, so I thought something's wrong with my health, which it absolutely was, but I wasn't able to heal my health issues until I addressed this. So it really wasn't until 2024 of August 8/8 where I really was exposed to a whole new layer of the underworld, one that I feel most people will never come across because it is just somewhere that, yeah, you really have to be ready for it, and ready as in having mastered the skills in many, many, many lifetimes to be able to go to that place. Um, and whereas before that, I was in the underworld, but it was a journey, right? It's like, I'm not going to start in the lowest of low places, of course, and neither are you. You're going to start where you feel comfortable, or there's probably a lot of discomfort as well, but where your soul knows, regardless of what the human thinks, that I can handle this. I'm getting an idea of what's going on here. I'm learning about the entities and the different attachments and how this place operates. And if you need to continue to descend, you will. Some people won't. Depends on the journey that the soul has taken up until this point and what you have decided to work through, the contract that you have in this life, or how much of this you're intending to see. And it's different for everyone. So, one thing that I also learned about the underworld and also the fourth to sixth dimensional beings is that everything is inverted. So what they do is they copy and replicate God codes to the best of their ability and use that for their own benefit. So by invert, I mean they take the original form, the code, the symbol, the geometry, the pattern, the intention, whatever it is, and they distort it, or it literally folds in on itself. They manipulate it, they falsify it, they warp, deform, and twist it. So now it kind of looks like the original code. However, it carries an entirely different meaning and frequency. And that is what they're working with down there. And for anyone who saw the post on light language, where I'm talking about how light language and code can be used to heal or used to harm, that is kind of a full circle moment there of how they are manipulating the pattern or the symbol. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and just kind of continue on the topic of God versus or Christ, God versus Antichrist, right? Where yes, we are all one, and yes, we come from the same source, but these beings have made the free will choice to separate from God. And the Antichrist was born, right? The opposite energy of that. And there was once God in these souls, but they have chosen that separation. They realized that they need God to stay alive. And I do believe that there are underworld souls that do still have a direct connection to God, but I also feel like a lot of them don't. And their connection to God is only through the beings and other souls that they siphon that energy from. So there is still God in these underworld beings, but not a direct connection to God. It has to come through another. And that is also, invokes all of these emotions going back to the self-hatred and the insecurity and the anger. It's like I see these entities that hate God, but know they need that energy, which makes them hate it even more. And the beings that embody and express this energy because they don't have it within themselves. But if they only realize that at any point in time, they can choose God again and reestablish that connection, it's just going to take work because they're going to have to go through the karmic process of being met with everything that they've put out. And they don't want to do that, entities or humans. So again, you have Christ and Antichrist. You have the underworld beings that are feeding the Antichrist, and also beings of higher dimensions like the reptilians that are also connected to the Antichrist. The Antichrist is just the energy at the core, whereas Christ is the energy at the core. And so my theory is that the Antichrist is the root, and the higher in dimension you go, the different form that it takes. So an entity, let's say a vampire in the underworld, is the same energy as a reptilian in the fourth dimension. It just manifests differently in different dimensions and different realms, also depending on the external reality. And of course, the fourth dimension, there's much more of a connection to God. So the reptilians are also feeding whatever energy they can connect to from the fourth dimension. They are feeding the lower dimensions. And so the way the reptilians work with the underworld is because it's the same energy, the same team, so to speak, even though they're from one perspective, they're really not on a team because there is no unity really. To an extent there is, but not fully. They have created these systems down there. So they open these portals, right, that connect the above world to the underworld to service themselves. So again, the difference when describing underworld versus fourth to sixth dimension is just level of consciousness and amount of of separation versus unity consciousness in that dimension. The higher dimensional dark forces are just more sophisticated in their manipulation tactics, whereas the underworld, there's just, honestly, to put it bluntly, more like primal torture. And in the higher dimensions, it's more polished torture because they're harming you and taking from you and doing all these things without you even realizing, which is our society, right? With our government and how we are programmed, and we don't even realize that we're programmed by this antichrist energy. Whereas in the underworld, it is, you know, there's brutality, there's evil down there in a different way. It's just it's more obvious. They're not really hiding it down there because they don't have to. So what they do is, what they've done to us here is like these soul fragments, right? These parts of our consciousness, when under pressure, when under stress, under trauma, it's like these parts of our soul kind of get disconnected and fragmented from the whole, sometimes to lessen the pain, sometimes to try to escape the situation that you're in. Let's use the example. Let's say if you're someone who is on the streets, who is addicted and using. And maybe there's been a past life of this, or, living on the streets, something like that, just for the example. And you can tell there is barely any consciousness in them, right? In some of them, they are extremely fragmented. And when I started this healing journey, I was only 20% in my body. Only 20%. That is really low. I was extremely disassociated. Like, it was my full-time job to make sure that, I was not here because I didn't want to be here, and I felt pain when I was here. So yeah, my life has been very challenging and difficult in so many ways, but nothing compared to this example that I'm giving. So you can only imagine what someone is feeling and experiencing, and how the trauma of that life can severely impact the percentage of consciousness that is in the body. So we know that substances invoke dark spirits. They, maybe some of you have seen for yourself that they can overtake that person. And because of that, there's a lot of soul fragmentation. What they do is those soul fragments get tied to the underworld, because the entities you've opened up to that do not have your best interests at heart, they're wanting to siphon and feed off you. They want to hijack and have you be a host for them. And the only way that we will ever say yes to that is if we're being suppressed to the point where we don't even realize it, or where we don't really feel like we have a choice, or we're manipulated into it. Because if you really are, fully connected to God, to yourself, and have that self-love and self-respect, you would never agree to that. So this is what's been happening on earth as well, where this energy has created this environment of suffering. Lifetimes where you maybe lost a parent or a child in a very traumatic way, or where you went hungry and didn't have the necessary basic necessities, where you really suffered. And over time, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, we're kind of just broken down more and more and more. And that's how they've gotten as deep into us as they are. So they prey and feed off of the fear and the pain, and they siphon energy from these fragments. And because the lower fragments are connected to the higher self, they're also, feeding off higher aspects of self, which is why we need to start to cut off their energy source and heal from those traumas and any of the stuck emotions that haven't been processed and the beliefs that have been, created and, into our being, and obviously the ancestral and the bloodlines, and that cuts off this energy from having access to us anymore. So again, the only way most of them are connected to God is through us. They don't have that direct connection to the life force energy. And we're realizing now, for many of us, we don't want to be host to these parasites anymore. And we're seeing that it's vicious, the energy, as we're experiencing love and unconditional love. And then we're seeing this energy. And I think that's, going back full circle to the beginning of the episode where I'm saying we attach, good or bad to this energy that just is to help us make sense of it. Well, if we're noticing these entities um, don't have love and they don't care about us and they make us feel sick and they don't listen to us or respect us when we ask them to leave. We're all experiencing these qualities and characteristics from this Antichrist energy, these soul groups that are generally negative, no respect, no love, no compassion. So again, like, I understand the idea of we need to love all beings, and we do, and we also can feel, hey, you're not showing up for me in the way that feels right for me. It's not respecting my boundaries. So I don't have to allow you into my space. I don't have to keep you in my life, whether we're talking about entities, as in non-physical beings, or humans, right? So again, it's with this whole new age theory on we need to love everyone. And yes, but we can also identify that this feels good for me and this doesn't feel good for me. And to kind of make the generalization that that these soul groups maybe don't have my best interests at heart, and these soul groups do, and therefore I'm no longer wanting to be a part of whatever's going on here. And there's nothing wrong with feeling that way. It's where we don't want to judge, right? We don't want to be point fingers of like, you're this, and this because of this, where it just is. This exists. They're allowed to exist. I just no longer want to be a part of this. And that's that. So anyway, I don't have names for all of the different types of beings down there, but I can describe some of what I saw. And as we, just in later episodes, we'll kind of maybe have a dedicated episode to vampires, to fallen angels, and stuff like that. But I'm just going to kind of explain some of the things that I've seen down there. And again, it's a lot of I see these underworld realms that kind of resemble these dark caves, or sometimes these like distorted castle looking things, or a lot of it is actually underground. And my ex mentor reigned a sub realm down there. So I learned a lot about these different subrealms because I had never experienced something like that before. And it's probably one of the most gruesome things that I've seen down there to date. I've seen dismembered and deformed humans, those giant dogs with multiple heads that I know we've seen in movies, people in cages. They mate human and animals for pleasure, and like they also force sexual activity with them and also between each other for fun. Definitely some really wonky, looking creatures with really long arms or a really long nose and like crooked teeth, just like deformed humans. Um, they also use animals to do their dirty work. And I've seen them also like torturing and inverting the animals. So I've, lots of bugs, bats, crocodiles, wolves, serpents, you name it. Dogs, obviously, as well. And there are so many trapped souls, which I've talked about in a previous podcast, where a lot of my work down there outside of one-on-one session is helping to free these trapped souls, because they, like I've been saying, they trap the fragment of the soul and then feed off of that soul. And because we exist in higher dimensions as well, they have a lot of energy coming in and they're using that energy for negative intent. And so when I was healing from this experience that I had, and, part of my confusion was they really put on a good show. How do they have so much light to work with if they really are as dark as I'm being shown that they are? Because it just wasn't making sense to me. And so we know that they're using the light not only to trick you and manipulate you, but to fund their rituals and all the things that they're doing. So if the source of their energy bank dissipates, then the veil falls on their true form, because they don't have the energy to continue to create that facade, and then they can't keep doing what they're doing. So that's how I see all of this unraveling, and why truly when they say the best way to heal the planet is to heal yourself is true. Because if every single person went and worked through this and retrieved these fragments, then these dark forces would no longer have access to as much energy as they do. And that is why I've been going into the underworld to give these souls the choice, right? Because there's always free will. If you want to leave, you can leave. And most choose to do that. So, again, two consciousness groups that I do know of: vampires and the fallen angels. But again, there's so many different realms with hybrid beings and just deformed looking creatures, and many, underworld gods and goddesses that are reigning these subrealms and these kingdoms. I was just blessed to be under a student under one of them for 5 years. So that's how I know that. So fallen angel is just another word for demon. Obviously, there's more to it than that, but they also are in human and non-human form. So yes, there are demons walking around as humans. A good example of this are the two people that run the Twin Flame universe. If anyone has seen that documentary, when I was watching it, all I kept hearing was these are demons, these are demons. And a lot of them too are disguised as healers, a lot more than you realize. And it also, the veil needs to lift slowly, right? Because it is kind of a shock to the system, which is why we really take our time through the underworld, and why it is a multiple, as a multiple lifetime, but also multiple months and sometimes even years when we're working through it here on Earth, because we need time to process. So yes, they are connected to Satan and Lucifer, which is going to be a whole other episode, because there's so much to say there. But at least for right now, you're kind of getting an idea of what their energy is. The Nephilim are basically a hybrid of fallen seraphim angels and reptilian Anunnaki. And this was a genetic manipulation that was not part of the plan, not agreed upon. They took it upon themselves to kind of create this sub race. And there were these insane insanely brutal wars that took place over this, over the whole Anunnaki breeding program, the shift in human DNA, right? Getting a little bit off topic, but yeah, they're a spawn of that. So again, be really careful of the angels that you're connecting with, and be specific on what type of angel you're connecting with, because the Nephilim are technically angelics, at least half, right? And then the vampires, who, again, they're just this type of underworld, low conscious parasite entity. I would also consider them to be demons. And they take energy from another to get what they want for themselves. This can also come in the form of a non-physical spirit or a human being. The human absolutely can be the vampire, or they have a strong vampiric attachment that siphons from them. And because of that, because it's so strong, everyone close to them. So if you have a friend who you can tell, is kind of an energy vampire, there is a chance that they are also siphoning from you being in the vicinity and being close to that person. So just being, mindful of who you're giving your energy to and who you're spending your time with. I recently had to disconnect from someone in my community who was an energy vampire, and not at her core, but there was a version of her that was trapped in this realm, and that it is going to be, it's like she can't get there, and she's trying to read the Akashic Records and do these healings, and they are very much extremely distorted. And you can feel this part of her, that this inner child that is just like screaming for help. And every time I would connect with her, I could feel that, like this part of her communicating to me. And finally, this didn't even happen in session. This was my own experience off time, where I was shown all of this for her, because at her core, she's light, and she's been overtaken by this group. And I know she can feel it. She feels that sadness, that longing, that fear, that separation. And they said it was going to take her 60 days of sitting with ayahuasca to be able to retrieve that aspect of her consciousness. So you can only imagine the journey that, sometimes we have to go on to even be able to access that part of ourself. And they said to me, this is, this information is like a ticket out of it for her if she chooses to see it, and that they recommend that she cancels her retreat and steps away from healing and really focuses on this, and she will come back stronger than ever. Did she do any of those things? No, she is still doing healings, and has not done this work. So I decided that this person is no longer someone that I want to be around and that I want in my community, because there's neglect there. So then after that, oh my gosh, I will never forget the feeling of what it felt like to remove her energy from me. And she was in me, like in a way that was just vile, because as soon as I decided I'm going to cut the contract with this person, because I shared what I needed to, and that was the whole point of us coming together, where in a past life, I agreed to help her. And she just kept taking from me, where that was not part of the agreement, but that is what a parasite does. And I was pulling her out of crevices of my body, of my organs, of my consciousness, that as it was leaving, I was like feeling parts of myself for the first time. It was insane. And it felt like really good because I was literally imagine this entity that is just stuck to you, that is so deep inside of you, and it's being removed. And it was her. It was her. It wasn't the vampire. It was her. And it was really an experience that I will take with me for the rest of my life. Wow. So that's one story of my experience with vampires, but I see a lot of them also as Akashic readers, a lot of them doing activations. I can definitely consider my ex-mentor to be one as well, because again, it's just taking energy that is not yours, right? And was not given to you through an honest and pure way. So, one more thing with the vampires is I feel like they're really, really easy to identify if you know what to look for. I don't know how else to explain this, but there's something in the face. There is something in the face that I just, it's a quality. I'm not too sure how to explain it, but hopefully you can take that little nugget of information and just apply it to maybe a veil lifts or something and you see it for yourself. But I always teach that the best way to identify these different soul groups is through frequency. So you become aware of the frequency of a vampire, and you go into a container with your guides where you are safe, and you ask your team of light to just allow you to feel what the frequency of a vampire would feel like, where there's no harm. It's not like you have to go put yourself in this realm to feel it. You're in a contained, safe space. Please do not do this if you do not feel like your container is 1,000,000,000% secure. Contact me. I can do this with you if you really want to identify the frequencies of not only vampires, but also the Andromedans, of the Pleiadians, of whatever it is. And we can do this in a way where you are 100% safe. Because if you're not, you kind of are opening yourself up now to an attachment, you know? So the way I teach when I'm in session in a psychic arts class or in, whatever, a group classes that I've taught in the past is we bring these frequencies in a very contained way so you can feel it, you can understand it. And now moving forward, you can identify it on others in their energy very easily, because now you know what that frequency feels like, and some people can even see it. And yeah, you just get better at reading energy in that way. So you don't have to pick up on something in the face, but it's something you can feel. All right. So I know this was a lot. I know this was, definitely a topic that was a little bit heavier. So thank you for still being here. Thank you for taking the time to educate yourself on all of this, because we don't want to stay in this space, but it is important for us to learn about it and to just bring awareness to it and have this knowledge. So I really appreciate all of you for going to these deep places with me, to these places that are, for the warrior, not for the faint-hearted. So maybe taking a few moments to just kind of come back to your heart, back to yourself, as we just allow the crystalline waters, the Christ light, the rainbow light, the dolphin and whales to wash over us, to purify us, to just bring us back into our hearts, back into the here and now, back into a space of pure love and light. Maybe just taking a few moments to shake it off. Maybe get in the sun or just ground yourself bare feet back into the earth, and just taking a few moments to release anything that we just talked about, and just feeling the connection to self and to God, to love, to compassion, to joy, to peace, to unity, to all that is. Once again, taking a deep breath in and letting it go. Okay, thank you again for being here. See you guys next time. I'm going to be doing a Q&A, and I'm really looking forward to that episode. So in the meantime, if you've been feeling like this is resonating and you do have soul fragments in the underworld and you want to start to work through that, please reach out to me. You can book a psychic surgery, or if you want to go even deeper, the light process. In the meantime, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram, Lauren on Earth, and laurenonearth.com. Love you guys. See you next time. Bye.